Welcome to another episode of the ASQ Podcast, where personal transformation and conscious leadership meet. Today, we delve into a deeply inspiring yet often challenging theme, turning our deepest pains into our greatest purpose. How do we transform the scars of our experience into the strength and spark for our quest? Let's explore this journey together. Okay, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Ready for another interesting conversation?
Yeah, I am. This one's going to be a little interesting. Well, we're always talking about being vulnerable, but this one's going to be good. I mean, I'm not as vulnerable as I used to be about sharing the story that I have to share. But this one's a good one because I don't think it's a very common term that people use, or at least just common conversations. People don't talk about this. So what are we talking about?
Yeah.
We're talking about post-traumatic growth, right? And we're talking about how to harness post-traumatic growth for purposeful living, to have a purposeful and meaningful life, right? Okay. So should I start with my quote first?
No, well, I
something?
mean, that's it's a very good thing. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm fortunate that I work in this type of field. So about in trauma and people that have really experienced a lot of challenging trauma. So I work in that field. So I'm able to see a lot of different points of views as to how we have the tendency to identify our lives based of staying on those type of things. And there's a lot of popular pop culture conversations about my trauma, right? But there's also the beneficial aspects of reflecting on this type of stuff properly, right? And gaining insight when you use the technique of properly reflecting, and then because you start growing and you start seeing differently. So I'm very interested, about talking about this problem, this topic, and the different connotations to it.
So as usual, I have a quote. I'm probably going to butcher this person's name, but it's by Khalil Gibran. And it's, out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. Yep. Pretty deep.
No, it is. I mean, it's like it goes.
I can't take credit. You found that one.
No, but it goes back to that idea of no sacrifice without bliss, right? And I one of the things that I talk to, in particular when I'm talking to young men, between the ages of 18 to 25, about the decisions that they made up to that point, right? I always think about in Nietzsche's Metamorphosis of the Spirit about the camel, right? Put a load on me, the social conditioning experiences. And for a big part of our lives, right, most of the stuff that happens and a lot of the choices and consequences of those choices that we make have nothing really to do with us, but it has to do with the instruction that we have gotten, right, from early in life and from our experiences, right? And it's easier to sit back and say that there is a deficiency when you're primarily with young men, or if you grow up without a parent that you're there's a deficiency. You're more at risk for this, and you're more at risk for that, and those things are true, but they're only one side of the coin. You follow what I'm saying, right?
Keep explaining.
Because the idea is that regardless of how much we think that we're 100% responsible for everything that happens to us, that is not true, right? Okay. So you don't choose to grow up without a father or in adverse situations, just as a place that you were pitched into, right? So the idea is that, you got to reflect on those things properly and start from the premise, wait a minute, I didn't choose this, but what I gained from that, and then how do you decide to move forward?
Right.
Because what happens
is what we talked about early on, and we continue to talk about, how do we integrate those experiences into our lives and then move forward?
Exactly, right? Because a lot of the times we thinking that, because again, we don't reflect properly, and we're going to get into like reflecting, because again, we're not 100%, and a lot of, people will say, well, I'm responsible. Yes, you are responsible when you get to a point in which you start understanding. But even after that, you still have to make choices that may be going against you because you don't have all the information, because it is impossible to see everything, which is kind of like the paradox of our illusion of full control.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the take of why thinking about this particular process is much more important. It's important to talk about it.
Right. So I think it's important to start so that people that are listening and watching will understand a lot. Like I said, post-traumatic growth is not a common term.
Yeah.
I mean, I at least I know in my conversations, it's not something that is just like, oh, this is what we talk about. This is what it is.
Well,
right?
pop culture, again, it's like
maybe it's labeled as a different term. Maybe
no, it's not. I mean, I was just met with a person who a doctor that works in this field, and in his book, he talks about post-traumatic growth. I mean, he talks about it, and it is a term that is used. However, right, and this is kind of like
it's a term that is used in psychology, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
It's not a mainstream. Hey, I just went through some post-traumatic growth.
Exactly.
It's not a common term
because it doesn't sell.
Exactly.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
The money is in the sickness, not the cure.
Right.
Right. So it's like if you're constantly, are pushing certain things out, it behooves you to keep people in the traumatic state,
right,
and not to growth, because then after that they don't need you anymore.
Right. No, I understand.
I
know that's a little bit of, you went off the deep end right there. I was just trying to let's just define what post-traumatic growth means. I'm over here just trying to be practical and just, hey, keeping it light. Yeah. But I think it's important, because it is not a commonly used term, that we differentiate it, because it is often confused. At least my awareness of this, or my understanding of it, is that it's often confused with resilience.
Yes.
Because they are similar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the differences between post-traumatic growth and resilience. Post-traumatic growth is when you go through an adverse situation, a difficulty, a challenge, trauma, perhaps even on the other side, divorce, these really traumatic experiences.
Yep.
And you come out of that experience a completely different person. Okay. And we'll talk about examples a little bit later. Resilience, while it means the same, it means like, oh, I lost my job. Now I got to freaking look for another job. You get another job and you go back to doing the same things that you were doing. You had a little hiccup and you go back to doing it. I'm not saying that that's not traumatic. It could be for some people. So it just depends on how you're looking at it.
Yeah. But and also it's like, the way that I see it is resilience means that you could deal with stuff. It doesn't mean that you're growing from it.
You bounce back. Right. You bounce back.
It doesn't mean that you're growing from it.
Right.
Right. It just means that you are able to deal with stuff.
Which ties into what we're going to talk about, which is reflection, because that's what that ties into. But go ahead.
No, and I think that's kind of like the difference, because when you're growing,
right,
you are gaining a greater appreciation for life, right? You improving the relationships around you, right? Because one of the things that I see trending in our culture, right, is to start thinking. I mean, it's happened to us. The relationship between kids and their parents, and how separating than that. You go on TikTok right now, and just because political ideologies, families are not talking.
Oh, yeah.
How is that growth? And how is that acceptance and a greater appreciation for the diversity of thought and experiences and perspectives of life.
Right.
Right. I think that actually is damaging more than it is beneficial. Yes, you might be able to stand on your own because I have my ideology and their ideology is wrong. Right. But again, it's just one perspective out of many. you know. So again, you might feel resilient that I'm able to put up with it, but are you really improving your relationships? Are you really appreciating, right, that you and I could look at something, see it differently, and be like, oh, wow, that's a pretty cool point of view. Well, that's different, right? So there is, you see it, and it's just, it's I've never been a big fan of popular culture anyways, you know, but when you start seeing these things, and you got to keep your, you know, you start seeing these things being said, but at the end of the day, is it causing more appreciation, more cohesiveness, more understanding of us as human beings and our different perspectives, or is it causing more separation, right? Truth is truth, regardless. And something good is something good. And something disguised as good that is giving you a different result, you need to question that. And that's what I think is between what you see out there and what resilience is. Yes, you could put up with it, but are you really, really better for it? I just think that that's a question that we all need to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I can think of a lot of examples in my own life where I've had, you know, when I was getting my divorce, and I told the story in our very first, I was the first episode for A Soul's Quest podcast. And the story, you know, just very briefly, you know, I got divorced after being with this person. Is like you said, you know, you go through these things because this is what you know, or what you've been taught, right? So I got with this person, and, you know, I ended up pregnant 6 months into the relationship. And I was like, oh God, I don't even like this person like that. You know, I'm not in love. And ended up, you know, getting divorced. But in the process of going through that, I didn't have a lot of support. My family did not support me. You know, my children was small, babies, and none of my friends liked me anymore because they were siding on his side because he was telling a narrative that was his own narrative to what was happening. Correct. Yeah. And never did anybody say, hey, Jesse, what's really happening here? Fast forward, it caused me to literally do an exodus. Like, I literally packed up my vehicle that I had purchased on my own and drove to Colorado and stayed in Colorado for a year. Yes, I left my children behind. Yes, I left everything behind. But I did it because I knew that this was something that I needed to go through to build myself up and be better than I was. Like, I had the foreshadowing to understand that this is what I needed to do. Yeah. And so against all odds, against, you know, I don't even know how much money I had in my pocket. I went to Colorado and I, you know, was homeless, and I went through this stuff, you know, was looking for food and whatnot. I wasn't homeless for a long time because I actually did get a job fairly quickly because I was a medical assistant at the time. And the place that I worked in had showers and whatnot. So I was able to, like, and they gave snacks and stuff to us and whatever. It was kind of convenient. And fast forward, that experience, I was able to, one, take care of myself, pay my own bills. Like, I was actually happy to, like, pay a bill. That's crazy. Yeah. Who's happy to do that? I was happy to do that though, because I was unable to do that in that marriage. I existed as this person that didn't exist. Yeah. I was the mother, I was the wife, and I was there to do the duties of the house. I didn't have a vehicle. I didn't have anything. Yeah. I stayed home. Yeah. That was it. So that was my identity. And so what I did with this exodus was to go out there, and of course I knew it. A lot of people go through these things and they don't know it, but you can if you have a level of awareness. And I'm not saying my awareness was great, but I just knew I have to get out of this situation in order to become better. Yeah. And when I did all of this and managed to pay my bills and whatnot, and even though I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor and had like one pan, and that's where I made my ramen noodles and had peanut butter and jelly, it felt good because I knew that I was a better person, that I was going to go back and I was going to be strong. And I was going to be able to face people and stand my ground and be confident in the things that I was doing and believing in. And I was a better mother as a result of it. I managed to have a relationship with my children till today. I have a great relationship with our son. So that to me is post-traumatic growth.
But so what specifically, because a lot of what you're mentioning right now sounds like a lot of resilience, right? To be able to do that. But specifically about growth, what was your change in perspective from that experience?
So I'll do the before and after. The before felt like she didn't have a support system, right? Because all of the support system that I knew turned their back on me.
Okay.
Family, friends, etc. The after understood that my support system came from me, from within.
Okay.
That's growth.
Okay.
That's not just resilience. That's I'm on my own and I got to make shit happen and I got to feel good on my own. That's one example.
Yeah.
Another example.
So self-reliance, right?
Definitely. And that's huge because a lot of people oftentimes, and it's not a judgment, so I don't want anybody to take this as a judgment.
Yeah.
It happens. I worked in human services for several years. That's my bachelor's degree. I get it. It takes a lot for women to leave a relation abusive, any partners to leave.
Physically,
It's hard to do that, and there's no judgment. I had the wherewithal to say, fuck this. I'm not putting up with this shit. I'm just not doing it. Not knowing where I was heading. That awareness for me was, I'm going to go off into the unknown. I'm going into the wilderness. I have no idea. I'm going to drive, what was it? 1,800, 2,000 miles. I don't even know how far it is from here to Colorado by myself with not a GPS. There's no GPSs at this time. Okay. There's like maps.
Yeah.
Yes. And I made it.
Yep.
And I managed to get a job my first week there, my third day there. So I had to have a level of confidence that I did not have when I was married to this person who made me feel less than. And I believed that I was less than. I believed that this was my role.
And that's the beauty of growth, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you see a change in you. Because again, resilience is what you put up with, right?
Correct.
That's what the stuff that you put up with. Growth is realizing, okay, I need a change. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I don't know what lays across the horizon, but I know that I can't stay here. And although this is going to be a challenging quest, I'm going to take it. Right. And then once you take it, you look back, and the growth comes from reflecting and saying, wow, I'm self-reliant. Wow, I know that if everything else falls apart, there's a place in me that I could go into to build strength.
Right.
Exactly. And to live from that point.
Correct.
Right. That's the thing that like this kind of like alludes to more than anything, because more often than not, right? And we do this in our lives, all of us do. I statements, right? I know that I've done it in my life, gotten stuck, right? In a certain identity for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
Believing that this was it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was so much safer
Yeah.
to stay there than go out on a limb, so to speak.
Yeah,
to discover different aspects of yourself.
Right.
Right? So that's a beautiful way to put it. That's the way that you explain it, and that's why I was asking you what did you gain?
Yeah, that's an important question, because that's what differentiates it from being resilient. There are tons of people that are resilient.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I mean,
yes.
Just, in my work, there's moments where I'm like, oh my God, I don't, and you go through a struggle and you have a bad week or a bad day or whatever, and you like come back the next day. That's resilience.
Yep.
That's coming back and saying, I'm going to do this. Right. But going through something that is like life-changing experience and having your whole mental capacity be changed as a result of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember a couple of times, just was, kind of funny, when we were together, especially in the beginning, all relationships go through their, ebbs and flows and whatnot. And I would say to you, when we used to get into our fights, and I'd be like, I don't give a damn. I'm not going to put up with your shit. I'm not. And you'd be like, and because I was firm and no, no, I'm not just not. And it's not like you were doing anything bad. We just had fights and we get, we're passionate. Us Latinos are very passionate.
You can say that. Yeah.
Don't be messing with me. If I'm putting up with your shit, all this. Wow. But I mean, it was like,
I had one of those in a while. Thank God.
No, a long time. But it was almost like, well, you didn't say that before, And I was like, you're right. I didn't say that before. And that was that damn right. I never said that before. I say it now. Mm-hmm. And that shows the growth, It's kind of maybe not the best example, but it's a good example.
It's an excellent example because it kind of like shows how it's just interesting, right? So like for me, right, that part came. I've always been very independent, right? But that part came from me professionally, right?
Right.
The trauma of dissolution of a career, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. That whole trauma of then asking yourself, why am I not liked? You start going into all these different things. Why are people always pushing you aside? Is it you? Is it this? So you start going into this identity of deficiency as well, right? Because of experiences. And to me, it was professionally. Yes, it took me a long time to really be firm about my identity as a person and who I was.
Yeah.
But then professionally was a challenge until I found like my niche, right? And even with that, it was like, I always used to get the looks and all these things, right? And you always think about that traumatic event and feeling like, oh my God, maybe I'm not as good as I think that I am. Maybe it's this and that. Maybe all this other stuff. Like my results were there, right? The results and the outcomes were there, but the response that I was getting from other people wasn't there, right? And for me, it was so challenging because I couldn't really understand, right? I really didn't. It's like, you could say whatever you want to say. You could say he's cocky. You could say this and that, but the results were there, and the people that was getting the services were never complaining. It was just colleagues and people above, right? And in middle management, that is such a challenging place to be, because even though you understand the mission, that's the mission of a place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're doing or what they want.
No, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So because there's a lot of hidden things that you don't understand, right? Or it's not shared with you, right? So you're fighting like this never-ending battle. Plus, you don't have the decision-making capabilities to actually change it.
Yeah.
But you start taking that in, and it manifests itself in like compassion, fatigue, frustration, anger, and all those things, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, the growth that took place, right, was because that was a breakdown,
Indeed.
That was really.
I was present.
You were present, right? That was something that
that was a hard time for you.
Yeah, that was very challenging because it's like, wow.
Yeah.
I love what I do. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I was good at it, I think. Yeah. People say that I was good at it, right? Or
the people that matter.
The people that matter said that. The people that mattered appreciated it, right? But still, it was hard to go through that, right? Like very challenging. It was, people, there's all this stuff about like dark nights of the soul and all these things. And yeah. But, to be in that pit is hard, right? So for me, that growth took place on creating something, which is what we're doing, right? A catalyst for this was just, let's talk. Let's just, let's create something, right? That for us, it's important, but it's also fun and engaging. And it's like, oh, we're creating something new, right? So you said self-reliance is one of those growth things that you realized in your experience, right? One of the things that I realized in my experience is finding meaning by creating something that comes from within me and comes from within us, right? And although there's nothing new under the sun, we're just rediscovering thing and sharing it. We are expressing it from our own point of view,
right,
from our own center of expression, right? So that to me was kind of like the growth that came from it, right? And I remember in all the studies that I do, there was this line, and I didn't understand it. At first, I didn't even know what the word meant. Inimical.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Inimical, right? And what it means is that the line was, nothing is inimical to men. Meaning, nothing is harmful for you. Right? And it's, when you start thinking about it, you're like, what the fuck? Like, this should hurt. I didn't choose this stuff. Yeah. This stuff is horrible. Like, and there's a lot of people out there that has really tough situations that they had. It wasn't them. It just happened, and they're just taking it in as it is, if it is them, right?
Yeah,
and
they take the burden on.
We take the burden on, right? So when I read that line, nothing is inimical to men, right? And even humankind as a whole, like the things that happen to us or not, right? Is to bring us to a point, right, that we go deeper to understand what you said about that deep connection with who you are, right? And your point of expression, right? Because we are all made, right? We are a way for the universe to know itself. So in essence, we are a small manifestation of whatever it is, right? So to understand that and operate from there, right? That was the thing that really kind of hit me hard. Is like, oh, now what do I still struggle with some of that residual stuff? Of course.
Oh, yeah. So do I.
Because again, it's like neuroplasticity and rewiring your brain and rewiring your thought. That takes time, just like that. Those events and the emotions that came from it, that takes time.
And also, there are things that happen that throw you off balance.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just blindside you, and when you're not expecting it, and you think that, for example, somebody has your back, or they're doing something that's good for you, and then you're like, wait, what? No, what happened? I trust. You know what I mean? So being blindsided by things that happen, it throws you off. And so you have to like, okay, I got to center myself. I got to find my center here and go back to that you learned from your previous experience. Yeah. But then also talking to the people who have not necessarily looked at it from this perspective that we're talking about here, that is not a new perspective. No. It's just something that we're putting out there and that's something that I kind of want to talk about is, how do people differentiate situations from, and so for example, somebody goes through a divorce and they categorize it as being, oh, I'm resilient, I bounced back. Sure, you did. But I think what's more important is for people to understand when they go through these situations and they come through and they come out on the other side, when you reflect, because you talked about this earlier, let's get into that, because you were talking about how it's important to reflect on these things. That's the important piece here.
Yes, it is, right? So
sorry, I said all that to say let's talk about reflection.
Yeah, but it like, before we go into, like, there's something that I pulled out the other day, right? So one of my groups, one of the guys kind of like said, he asked me for some books, and then we're sitting around and he said, hey, we should kind of like, read a book and talk about it. And it sort of happened that the book that I brought him was Men's Search for Meaning.
I saw you with that book. I was just going to say, is that why you have that book? Oh, yeah. That's funny.
So, and I read the book several times and I listened to it, and it's really one of the greatest books that I have ever read. I have I'm Okay, You're Okay, The Alchemist, but Men's Search for Meaning, it's like one of those books that is very impactful in a subtle way, right? And the part that there's a couple of parts, and I wrote them down because I kind of like wanted to be specific about it, right? It's like, number one, it shows you the complexity of life, right? Good versus evil, you could see the humanity in some of the guards, and you could see the brutality in some of the capos, right? In the concentration camps, right? And so to see life just black and white becomes problematic because it's very grayish. Because, right? And then because when we go into situations, we're constantly looking at it from a polarity standpoint and now they're in the play of it all, right? Because it's not as easy, it's just not that simple. Life is way too complex to differentiate it like that. So that's one thing that kind of like came to me. The human our ability to adapt. So during trauma, I mean, think about this man, right, living in a concentration camp every moment of his life, awake or sleep, his life is in peril. Every single moment, right? And the thing that blows my mind, number one, is the adaptability. Number two is that understanding of a belief in something, that inner world, right? Though some people call spirituality, some people call whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You know, choose your vehicle. That's what I tell people. I'm not going to tell you your vehicle. You got to choose your own vehicle.
Right.
But that thing that connects us all and puts you in connection with the universe, right? There's something in there too. That's why that line is so powerful. Because if the universe collects everything, right, it does everything, right, nothing that happens is amicable to humans. It's for us to connect to it even more and live from there, which is the part that I love about this book, which is the part about the cabbage farm story, right? Do you remember that part?
No.
Right? Because
this book is so old for me at this point.
Yeah.
Because when I met you, you were like talking about this book.
So
this is 24 years later.
So the cabbage story, it's
I
indicative.
vaguely remember.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's indicative of what happens or the tendency that happens after we deal with trauma, right? So here's the story,
Okay.
right? And this is why it's important to reflect properly, right? So here's the story. So Frankel and a friend, they get, they come out of the concentration camp.
And just for clarity, Frankel is the person that wrote this book. Because I don't know if you said that. Okay.
Victor Frankl is he's the writer and he's also the creator of logotherapy.
Right.
So they're walking to a farm, right? And his friend wants to, and I'm paraphrasing, he wants to destroy, the farm. He wants to go and just ransack it and all that stuff because the world owes him because of what happened.
In the concentration camps.
Right.
Okay.
But Franco says, no, that's not what he chose to do. Right. So you see how easy and how complicated things are because, yes, we experience trauma, but the outcome of it and what we decide to do with it could actually give us in a direction of finding more meaning for our lives, right? And from the standpoint of seeing the interconnectedness of life, operating from a place of your authentic essence, which is the connection to one another, leading from that place, right? Or you could actually do things from a place of retribution. Right,
making people pay for what they did to you.
Yeah, and it becomes passive retribution, right? Because it kind of like, I'm a victim, right? And you all owe me, right? And you see that quietly in pop culture.
Of course.
And you see that quietly in leadership and the way that we interact with the people that we lead on a regular basis because, well, our bosses did this, it's my time to hold the whip.
Right.
And you see it. Like I've seen it in people. The moment they get a promotion, they're completely changed. Now I'm in charge. Right. So the reason why I bring that up, right, is because when you start looking at your challenges that you have in your life, your traumas, right, the idea is to reflect on them and get what is it how did I grow from this experience? Right? How did I grow from walking away from this career? Well, I grew because, number one, it forced me to see that I could do something else. Now, that's a challenge in and of itself, and I need resilience to go through that. Of course. Right? it forced you to leave something that was not good for you. Your soul talked to you and said, nope, this is not good enough for you. And it challenged you, right, to go in a different direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you need resilience to go through that? Absolutely.
Of course.
But you grew from it. So when you look at our situation in life, one of the things that I'm hating right now is this whole conversation about, oh, you grew up without a father and this and that and the other. It's like we didn't choose that, right? So I don't know what it is to have like a real father figure. I have mentors like Ken, like Mike, like Fred. I have mentors, but to have a father day in and day out that guided me and talked to me, I don't know what that feels like. So that means that I'm deficient? No. My point of expression and the universe, for better or worse, which I did not choose, right, put me in that particular situation so that I could look at it from the point of view, right, and find my way of expressing, right? And I could choose. I could be a dick, like or I could have kids everywhere, which I don't. Like
who? I'm just kidding.
Right?
You don't have to say it.
No judgment, right? They choose to do that. Or I could learn from that. And even now, right? Even the fact that I'm sensitive, that I'm conscious, that I'm,
Wait, what? You're what now?
Sensitive.
Sensitive?
Yes. Whatever.
You admitted it. No,
I never have a problem with it. But look at that. Look how society starts judging men and people.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
Because again, my point of expression was more sensitive because the universe wanted it there. Otherwise, how else would you explain it? Because I didn't choose it.
Yeah, no. Well, and also, I don't want to go into a different digress, but you're right. Like some of these things that society will say are negatives are actually positives. They're amazing. Like a lot of people don't know this, but some of the people that listen to us and whatnot, or, we couldn't talk about what we talk about if we weren't sensitive.
Correct.
And vulnerable and acknowledging that we're imperfect people. I mean, nobody that's watching this podcast is saying, oh my God, that's flawless. They look amazing. We do what we fucking want to do. We wear what we want to wear. This is our home. This is our home studio. And we're your average people who want to give from that center of expression and live our authentic essence.
And this is psychology. This is what Carl Jung calls individuation, right? Which is the shedding of persona, the shedding of ego. But sometimes this trauma is to break you away from that, because when you start really getting down to it, right, your authentic essence is that point. Right, like the self in Jung's framework of the mind, which is understanding that subconsciousness in you and the universe are all one and the same.
Exactly.
And the web of gems, that what you do reflects on other people. This is all that it is this interconnectedness in the way that we interact with one another, and everything that we do, right, when we reflect on our experiences properly. When we see that, okay, I could seek power. It's nothing wrong. I don't have a problem with people seeking power. Now, you're seeking power for self-gratification, right?
Yeah.
Or you're seeking power for the betterment of all, right? And we see it all played out. You see it all played out. You see it played out in nature, right? So when you start looking at all this stuff, right, and you start reflecting properly on your experiences, both positive and negative, right, you start understanding not everyone has the same experiences, but the common denominators of those experiences we could relate to. And that's what empathy is about. It's not about me getting in your shoes.
Exactly.
It's about, let's say, for instance, an example is someone that has been domestic violence, right? It forces a person to feel trapped, not knowing where to go, not sleeping at night, asking themselves, oh my God, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? That despair, that feeling of, I don't know what to do, right?
So
I can't relate with her specific experience.
Exactly.
But I could relate with the emotion.
Emotions. Thank you.
Right?
Yes.
So when you start reflecting, and that's
the difference between compassion and empathy.
Correct.
Because empathy is going beyond yourself to recognize the pain, the emotion that individual is feeling.
Yes.
And saying, dude, I've been there. I
like,
feel you. I get it.
I haven't experienced exactly what you have.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we're not supposed to have the same experiences. But the common denominator of despair, right?
Yeah.
Of loneliness.
I feel that.
Right? Of laying in the fetal position and crying.
I feel that.
Right.
With a big glass of wine or maybe a bottle. Yes. A bottle.
Yep.
That is exactly. It's meeting that person where they are, acknowledging what you just said, and being there with them through that process.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to leading people, right? That's where you lead from.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yes.
That's the place to lead, right? Because again, our humanity only excels when we are actually humans and not animals.
Yeah.
When we're not acting like sophisticated animals, right? Instead of acting like human beings, because human beings is a totality, is a human race, and seeing these things, right? So when we start learning and reflecting, right? Because again, sometimes the oppressed becomes the oppressor, and the cycle goes on and you see it over and over again. Everybody wants an opportunity to hold the whip, right? That's kind of like what we want deep down inside. We just want the opportunity to hold the whip, right? So when you start understanding that, reflecting on your experience, gaining from that perspective, the growth that you and the other are one, right? And understanding that it might be that in certain situations, it's not the right place for you. It's not the right place for them, but not doing it from an antagonistic point of view, which is what you see a lot in our culture right now.
Yeah.
Right? You see a lot of like, well, that's my point and they're wrong. We label people like that, narcissists like that, this and that and the other, uneducated, blah, blah. Like we are so quick to label people, right? Without fully, because again, it's like we think that we're growing and we think that we're evolving, but we're being that guy destroying the cabbage patch. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the most beautiful things.
So let me do this because we just have a few minutes left, and I want people to sort of, because we talked about a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So let's just take 3 things that we can leave our listeners with, sort of kind of just to, after they finish listening to this, these are the 3 things they can go to the end of this if they want and re-listen to the 3 takeaways, which are sort of maybe like, I hate saying tips and strategies, but that's kind of what they are of ways that they can sort of integrate this mentality or this way of thinking about their situations, which starts with, for me, a level of self-awareness.
Correct.
Is entering into these situations that you're going through with, I know this isn't easy. And in fact, you've done this to me in the last couple of weeks because I've had some challenging moments. And you've forced me, even though it's really fucking annoying when you do it, but you forced me to stop.
It was a bit blunt.
You forced me to stop and go, okay, what in this situation am I supposed to be learning? And that is so difficult. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to say this is going to be easy. It's just a strategy. No. It's difficult. But not only are you being resilient because you're showing up the next day for whatever the situation is, in my case, and in other people's cases too, but you're also, what is it that you're taking from that situation and applying and learning from it? And that is the growth.
Yes.
And so that would be number 1.
Yes. Another one, again, this kind of like goes back to, one of our principles, perspective.
Right.
Right. And our perspective is limited. Right. It just is. Right. In order for us to broaden that perspective, we have to look at a situation from different angles.
Right.
We have to see what somebody else might be seeing, right? We can't sit with the same people with the same ideology and the same problems, constantly talking about the same things and expecting to see the problem in a different way. We gotta step away. We gotta look from this angle, from that angle, start exploring different points of views.
Right.
We live in an information age, but we are less informed than ever before. And the reason being is because we are looking at one certain thing.
Right.
And I get it. It's easier to do so, right? Because it's easier to do so because it emphasizes our identity. It like justifies it. It says, yes, this is who you are.
Right.
But that's not who you are.
No.
Right? That's your persona. Right? So looking at different points of view, although it might be uncomfortable, it might be challenging, right? To find the common denominators, that will be something else to do.
So to piggyback on that, I would say that that's with the perspective aspect, to shift from, and maybe this is the third thing, right, is to shift from that, oh, why me? Why is this happening to me? Because I have done that. This is why I'm bringing it up, because I have done that and you have corrected me, to changing that mindset from why me to what now?
Yeah. Why is the worst question that you could ask when you're going through something.
Yeah.
And the reason being because it's a cyclical answer.
It totally is.
It's never ending.
It
right?
is. Yeah.
So questions like what, how, where, when, you know, who.
Forget the why.
Why is the worst question that you could ask when you're going through something. Again,
it is
why
cyclical.
did this happen? Well, this happened because of this. Or why did that happen? Well, and then it goes down and down.
It's a rabbit hole.
Down
it's a rabbit hole.
hole. Yes.
Yeah, it totally is.
It really, really is. That's why when I was going through my coaching training, that was one question that they say, stay away from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
And I never understood it. And then I started like listening to people talk and then listening to myself talk. And I was like, that is a horrible question because it gets you down.
Yeah.
So don't ask that question, right? So I love the fact about asking questions. And I'm going to add to that, right? Document it.
Journaling.
So journal it, write it, speak it, whatever it is, write it, document it somewhere, right? Because what happens with us, right, is that we stay primarily in our thoughts, right? And the process goes from here, which is from here up, which is the anxiety that we feel,
right?
The buzzing, and then our minds just keeps going. So it's almost as it is necessary to pull it out so that we could see it and make sense of it.
Yeah, to reflect on what you've written down.
To reflect on
it
or and to see it, right? And then to ask those questions. You know, so that will be the process. One will be, what is the first one that you said?
You were the first one.
No, you were the first one.
No, you were the first one.
So self-awareness was number one.
Self-awareness.
Be aware where you are, what you're doing, right? Number two, properly reflect on the experience.
Correct.
Right.
And I piggybacked with the don't ask the why, but ask what now.
Ask those questions, right? Looking at a different perspective.
Correct.
Right. Expands your perspective. Go outside of your comfort zone to see what somebody else is seeing and to see something else, right? And then document it.
Journaling.
Document it, journal it.
Whatever, however people feel good to.
However it is.
Sticky note it.
And then, and then see also, right? And this is one of the things that I'm fortunate enough to where I work, I'm able to see people grow. And one of the things that they don't do enough for themselves, it's kind of like acknowledge when they have. Right? So like it is kind of like my job to say, well, you are here. And look at where you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, because we don't see, we're not able to rule because we live in our heads, we seldom are able to see how we've come from here to there. That's why documenting
Yes.
Writing it down,
Yes.
it's cool because you can see, oh shit, I
It
was
is.
thinking this way, now I'm thinking this way.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
I want to, and so we'll end with this because that's a great way to just kind of leave it on a really high note. A lot of times we don't have an Omar who says, yeah, but you were here and look at where you are now. There isn't always that person.
No.
So we have to be that person
Yes.
to ourselves.
Yes.
And that goes into episodes and episodes of discussing treating ourselves well and acknowledging ourselves and being aware and all this different shit that we talk about, right? But the bottom line is when you can journal, which this is why I'm saying I'm piggybacking on yours, but we'll end with this. When you journal, when you can look at, and with my journals, it's what I do is I write in the front of it the date that I started my new journal and then the date that I ended it.
Okay.
Because I want to be able to go and be like, oh, okay, where was I during this time? And when I look back to journals from like 2-3 years ago, I'm like, what the fuck was I writing about? What does this all mean? And then I read the stuff that I'm writing today. I'm like, oh, I sound sophisticated. This is nice. But I'm like, but I'm going through some shit. This is really crazy. I'm going through some changes. There is a remarkable feeling that comes from seeing that growth.
Yes.
So I highly encourage journaling, even if it's just 2 sentences. There's entries where I've written the date and I've been like, I got nothing to say. I got nothing.
And that's fine.
And I just write it. I just put the date. And there's days where I don't journal anything at all. But there's some days where I mean to sit down and I'm like, I don't got anything right now. I don't feel it right now. And I'm not feeling it. So it's no pressure. It's just this place that you can go to that is your place. And, you know, like you and I are pretty good about that. I mean, at one point, I think I was guilty of reading your journal, but we don't do that to each other. We respect each other's space. But if you're with somebody and you want to hide it or put it away, hide it or put it away because it's your personal thoughts. It's your space do that. Well, I think we talked about it in the last episode. It's a place where you can have your catharsis and say everything and dump it.
Yeah.
Just dump it there and leave it there. Yep. You know, that's why it's so important. And that's kind of where I wanted to leave that because I think that journaling is a really effective tool. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the ASQ Podcast. Now that you've watched or listened to this episode, take a moment to reflect on a challenging experience in your life and consider what growth has come from it. How does this make you feel? Does it inspire you? Whatever that situation is, does it inspire you? Join our community on social media and share your story. Connect with others on their journey. What meaningful insights can you share? What can you take away? Don't forget to check out our upcoming book for more transformative insights. Join the movement. Live authentically, lead with purpose, and we'll see you in the next episode.